And I'm going to fork the example I started the other day. So I'm going to go back to my Replit account. And so I started this intro to Tone. I'm just going to make a copy of this. So I'm going to go over here and fork this. And we'll call this Tone.js interaction and fork this. And let's take a look at our script. Okay, so this is kind of where we left off. I might get rid of some of these comments since we're in a new project, but I will put this link over in the chat. Um, so I'll add some stuff in here. So just to review what we did last time, so when we're working with Tone, we have to have some sort of user interaction before we can start because of the rules of the browser. So that's why we have this start button up here. It's not really related to Tone, but it's just a requirement. So this starts the Tone library, which connects it to the browser um, audio context. And then we have a little setup function to get started. So when the user clicks the start button here, it's going to start Tone, and then it's going to, once Tone is done, which is what this await keyword does, then the setup function will go. And inside the setup function, we just created a simple synthesizer, and then we're just playing a note here. And we also made this like random note function, which I left in here because it might be useful later. But this isn't really, this was something that we were talking about sort of after the main lesson, which we could probably use again later, but for now, I'll skip over that. So when we run this, we're going to hear a little sound. And yeah, that's kind of what we did last time. So now what we want to do is add some user interaction. And so I'm going to go over a couple different ways to do this. Um, and we'll also look at a way to use an object to make it a little bit more convenient. So I'm going to get rid of some of these comments in here. And I'm gonna replace the random note with just a C4. And so we'll kind of simplify things down a little bit before we add some more stuff. Okay, so this is now just gonna play a C4 note for a quarter note. Okay, so it's pretty simple, but what we really want to do is give the user the ability to play this sound. And so to do that, we need to add some events and we need to add some event listeners. So uh, we kind of talked about that when we were doing, or we did actually go over some keyboard events when we were doing Three.js stuff. So this will be a little bit of review, but this is a very common thing that we have to do in JavaScript, so it's a good thing to review. So I'm gonna use a keyboard mostly, and I'm just gonna kind of give my user the ability to play sounds with different keyboard keys. And so the main event that I'm gonna be looking for is when a key is pressed and when a key is released. So I wanna add a couple of event listeners, and I'll put them in the setup function so that basically that will prevent the sounds from being played until the start button has been pressed. So we'll know that the user has interacted with the page before we add our other events. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to make an area for my keyboard events setup. So to add a keyboard event, I need to use the document. So I'm going to reference the document and, oh, the Replit has some nice uh, code hints. So I want to add an event listener, which is actually this second method that appears. So I'm going to click add event listener. And then what I want to look for is a key down event. So I'm just going to put key down as a string. Whoops. And then I'm going to react to this event with a key down function, which I'll define later in my code. Whoops. Okay. So that's my key down event. And this one is a little weird because usually in JavaScript we use the camel case. So key is lowercase, down is uppercase. For whatever reason, the JavaScript event for this is all lowercase. I'm not really sure why they did it that way, but that's what it looks like. So now we're going to say document.add event listener. And for this one, we'll do key up. So we can listen to both the key being pressed down and then the key being released. So we'll have a key up function. And so you guys know I like to have my code nice and organized. So I'm going to put these two functions on the main uh, function scope. So I'm going to have my key down function here, and I'm going to have my key up function directly under that. And so one thing that I'm going to have to do now is that this synthesizer that I created only exists inside the setup the way that I've written it. So I need to make this synthesizer reference available to the rest of my functions. And the easiest way to do that is just make this a global variable. So what I need to do instead of declaring my synth like this, what I need to do is declare it in my global variables. So I'm going to say let synth up here. And then I'll remove this constant here so I can just assign my synth to the synth variable here. And then now I can actually move this trigger attack release into key down. And so now I can trigger a synth when I press the key. So I'll get rid of it inside my setup. So now my setup function is just going to assign this synth, and it's going to set up my keyboard events. And so once my user clicks start, they'll be able to press a key, and for a minute, it'll just be whatever key they press, and we'll hear this synthesizer. Okay, so let's try that. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to click run and go over here and click start. And then if I hit a key, it just plays my synth. So that's pretty cool, but obviously we want to do more than just play the same note over and over again. So let's,
Is
uh,
it any key?
right now it's any key, because inside key down, I haven't specified which key. So this is just looking for any key that gets pressed. And so the next thing we're going to have to do is check which key we're pressing before we play a note. Um, so right now I'm doing this trigger attack release thing. So this will play an eighth note. So this is probably fine for what we want to do. If you want your user to be able to play the synth like it's a keyboard, you could do a trigger attack and then trigger a release later. So I'm probably not going to use it that much, but one thing that you could do is say synth.trigger attack instead of triggering the attack and the release. So I could trigger my C4, and instead of saying what the note length is, now I just have to give it a time. And I'm just going to start it immediately. So to start it immediately, I can just say, I have to go back to my Tone wiki to remember this. So let's go to Tone on GitHub and go to the wiki and go to time. And so if we want it to go immediately, there's a shorthand for that, which is, oh, using the plus, which we can just say, uh, oh, actually, maybe I don't have to put anything. Yeah, okay, I don't have to put anything here. Um, so it'll just fill in the current time if I don't put in an argument. So hopefully that'll work. If not, we can put like a +0 or something like that. So we'll trigger an attack, and then when we release the key, we will release um, our, or sorry, trigger release. And so now we should be able to play the note for as long as we want. So let's run and then start. So yeah, now I'm just like holding down the key, and it plays until I release the key. So that's a way that you could do it. You don't have to do it that way, but Yeah, either way, it kind of is sounds pretty similar. You might be able to notice the differences, but that's sort of like yeah, one way to do it. Let's leave it like that for now. I might add a sampler in a second if we have enough time, and we could trigger some samples. But what's more important is what we want to play different notes. So let's look at how to play different notes. So what we need to do is we need to know what key we're pressing, and then we can decide based on what key we're pressing which note we want to play. So we need to figure out what key we're pressing first. And the cool thing about this document .event listener is it actually this event listener, when we call this function, it actually has a default parameter called an event. And that event is an object with a lot of information in it. So let's take a look at that event. And so I'm going to run this and let's go over to the full screen so we can see that information. Okay, so I'm going to click start and then I'm going to play. So there's my keyboard event. And there's a lot of information in here, like what the key is, what the key code is. I tend to like key code better. It's a little bit more reliable because the key could be uppercase or lowercase. There's a meta key. This is whether we're holding like the Windows key or the Mac key. There's a shift key, whether or not we're holding the shift key at the same time. And then which is the old version of key code, which is still possible. This means like which key, which is still how I tend to think about it, but they added in key and key code, which is a little bit more obvious what those actually mean. There's also the code. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of different stuff in here, but what we really need is either to know what the key is or the key code. Either one of those is fine. I think there might be some differences across browsers, which is why there might be some inconsistencies, but I'm not 100% sure what the issues is. I can't remember. But there's an easy way to know which key is which. If we go to keycode.info and I press a key on the keyboard, it'll just show me what key I pressed, what the event.code is, event.which. Um, actually doesn't show event.key code, which is interesting. But anyway, and it just shows me the number here, which will be both the key code and which. So A is 65, B is 66, C is 67, etc. There's a table that also shows you all the key codes and what keyboard key they map to. So that's really useful. And we just want to know what the keys are so we can give our user the ability to play different notes on the synthesizer. So now we have to decide what key is going to map to which. We don't really want to do like A, B, C, D, E, F, G because those keys are not like in a line or whatever. Usually, depending on the program, you might have like like across the keyboard, like A, S, D, F, G, H, etc., as the white keys, and then like the top line, like WE and like TY or something like that is the black keys. But
Hmm.
let's keep it simple. We'll just do
Uh, Professor, make like keys 1 through 8 for an octave, and then Q through
mm,
I for a higher octave, and then go down A through K for another higher octave, and then Z through M for another. Like each 8 keys, when you go down the
oh,
keyboard, it's a higher octave.
okay. That sounds a little bit more complicated than what I was planning, but that actually wouldn't be too hard. We could maybe do that next time. But that makes sense. But let's just do a couple keys to start, just to make it a little bit simpler. So what I'm going to do now is kind of show you guys how objects are useful. So I'm going to start by coding this using just conditional statements, and then we'll code it using an object. So what we want to do is decide which note to play based on which key we pressed. So for example, I could create a note value. So I could say let note, and then I could assign that note based on the key press. So I could say if event dot key code equals 65, I'm just going to start with A, then my note is going to be, let's say, A4. And so then I'm going to trigger the note rather than C4. Um, so that looks good. This should work. Let's run it and see. Okay, that sounds like an A4. Hopefully that's right. Let's stop logging this event. We don't need to do that anymore. So then we can just keep going. So if event.keycode equals 66, then our note is going to be B4. And so let's run that version. So now we should have two notes. Okay, so A and then B. But actually, I just did the opposite of what I said we should do, which is what's next to A is S. So what's the key code for S? It's 83. So let's put 83 here. Whoops. And I'm just going to do a couple more. So you get the sense like, okay, this is starting to look crazy, right? I'm just repeating the exact same code over and over again with different numbers. So now D is 68. So now our note is going to become C4. And if event.keycode equals what's ASDF is 70. Now our note is going to be, oh wait, I skipped one. No, I didn't. ABCD4. Okay, so this will work. Now I can play four notes. Oh, I'm skipping. I always forget that MIDI is weird. This should actually be A3, B3, and then it switches at C. This doesn't make any sense, but I think this is how it works. A, B, C, D. Okay, so that's kind of cool. But you can tell if I wanted to play every note on the keyboard, this would be insane, right? It would take me forever to write all these if statements. So what I can do instead is I know the key code is always going to be event.keycode. And so what I can do is map the codes that I'm looking for to the notes that I want to play. And a very easy way to do that is using an object. So what I'll do now is rewrite this using an object. So before my synth, I'm going to create this notes object. And this is just a map, or you might think of it as a dictionary, excuse me, that matches the key that I pressed to the note I want to play. So let's go back and look. So 65 should be A3, and 83 should be B3, and 68 should be C4, and 70 should be D4. Okay, so now I can play any one of these notes just by mapping it. So instead of saying if event.keycode equals 65, I can say note equals our notes object. And here's where my bracket notation comes in handy. I'm going to use some brackets and to say event.keycode. And what that's going to do is it's going to take whatever the value of the key code is, let's say it's 65, and it's going to look that up inside of my notes object. So if we go back up here to the notes object, what is the value of 65? It's A3. And so it'll give us that string. And then now we can get rid of all this other code. We don't need this anymore. And now we can play our note. Okay, so yeah, that's a good reason to use an object. And now we can add whatever notes we want in here. You might want to add a scale. I'm not going to quite get into scales yet. We'll probably talk about that next week. But let's say we wanted to, yeah, let's just add a C scale. That'll sound better than what we're playing. So let's put C4 on note 64. We'll put D4 on, sorry, I'm going to put a comment here so we know which keys these are, because otherwise we'll forget. So this is A, S, D, and F. And so let's add three more notes to get a full scale. So C, D, uh, E, F, and then
Does it really matter if it's a lowercase or if
um,
it's lowercase or uppercase?
it depends on the context, but yes, it can. Uh, so let's see, my last three keys are G, H, and J, which happen to be kind of close together. So 71, 72, and 74. So 71, 72, 74. There's better ways to do this, but I'm just doing an example. So 71 is going to be
You
C,
need one
D,
more.
E, F, G. But this is the, oh, this is actually the G key, so that kind of lines up. 72 is A, B, C, D, or C, D, C, D, E, F, G, A, 4. That's our H key. And finally, J is going to be B4. That's our J key. And then, yeah, I guess if we want to complete
Yeah, you're missing one note.
the scale, we have to add K in there, which is 75. I never realized that those numbers are all close together. So then we go up to C5. So that'll complete our nice C major scale, and that's the K key. So let's run this one, and now we should be able to play a scale. So that's pretty cool. So, I'll talk a little bit more about like some music theory stuff next week so we can do stuff with sequences and stuff like that. Um, but, there's some basic things you could do. Like if I wanted to make this a minor scale instead of a major scale, well, how do I make a minor scale? I take the third and I flat the third, but there's no flats in tone, unfortunately. So this would actually become D sharp for the third. And then for the uh, seventh, that would have to be flat, so that would become A sharp. And so now this should sound like a minor scale. So that's kind of cool. So we'll talk about ways to kind of play with what these notes are to get more interesting um, results than just a basic C major scale. But for now, we can just kind of get started with this. So there's our synthesizer. Again, you can play around with a lot of stuff, and I'm going to talk more about like effects and stuff like that next week. But you can also play around with the parameters of this synth. Um, so let's do that real quick, and then also want to add in a sampler because I think that will be fun to play with. Um, and hopefully I can do that quickly. Um, yeah, the parameters, I didn't really go over this last time because I wanted to talk about objects first. But if we want to change the parameters of our synth, we need to do that right here. So let's look at tone and look at some examples. So we can look at
Real
our,
quick, Professor, can I um make a key
mhm.
play several sounds at once? Like if I want a key to play one chord, another key to play another chord, then it can like, is it possible?
Yeah, for sure. You would have to use a different synthesizer, but you could make like a list of notes. But when we do this, we'll do this in a couple weeks, but it'll be easier when I go over like sequencing. It'll be a lot easier to do something like that in uh, with using a sequence with a different type of synthesizer. We're going to look at ways to generate like chords rather than just notes when we talk about music generation. Um, for now, it's a little bit too tricky to go into at the minute, but we'll talk about it a little bit later. But there's lots of,
All right.
yeah, yeah, sorry. There's lots of examples. I'll try to think of a good example to send you if you want to do that now. But we will talk about it in next week or the week after. Um, so anyway, sorry, looking at our some parameters. So I have the default FM synth. It sounds pretty decent. We can see it sound how it sounds here, but I might want to like change some stuff. Like, let's see, if I want to change the oscillator, what if I use like a square wave that has more of kind of like electronic feel? So when I change that value, remember that I can click on this little brackets and it'll actually show me all of the parameters that go in. These are all the default parameters of this synthesizer. And if I want to change one of those parameters, I can look at it in here, although there's a whole lot of them. So here's the modulation parameter. And so if I don't want to copy all of these, I'm fairly certain that I can just copy the one that I changed. So I can copy this data and then go back to my synthesizer and I can put the parameters right here and just like paste this in. And let's format that. And so I put in curly brackets. Let me do that again because I did that kind of quickly. So I can put it right here. I can put some curly brackets to make an object, and then I can paste in the parameters that I copied. And I think I can get rid of all the defaults, and this should just change my synth to a square wave. It kind of sounds the same. Let me see if I run it again. Maybe I don't need this part. Okay. I don't know why that's not working. Let's take a look at the documentation. Do, 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 do. Okay. Options. Uh, okay, so I guess, so modulation. So that's what I did. So modulation, and then modulation has a type. Okay, yeah, I don't know why this isn't working. This should this should work. I'll have to debug it later. Um, so anyway, let's see if there's an easier parameter to change. Maybe detune. And we can't really hear. What if I detune it by a lot? Mm, no, that's not that interesting. Okay, what if I change the oh, maybe portamento would be easy to hear? Oh no, that sounds bad. Let's try harmonicity. Let's see if I play with the harmonicity. Okay, that sounds, at least we can hear the difference there. So let's try that. So instead of this modulation thing, I'm just going to change harmonicity to, let's say, 20. Okay, so now you can see that it has actually taken on that change. So that's a way that we can change these parameters. But normally what I'll do is instead of putting this directly into the synth itself, I'll just make a variable for this. So I'll say like let parameters, or you can shorten that to params, and then just put the object there. So that'll be kind of like an easier, whoops, way to write this instead of like having all of your code falling on top of itself. Okay, so now this should kind of work. And yeah, so that's how we can add some different parameters. And yeah, okay. I was gonna add a sampler, but it's gonna take me a few more minutes. I don't know if you guys wanna have some time to work. We only have like half an hour left. Um, what do you guys think? Okay. Uh, we can add it next time. I think this is enough to cover for one day. So I'm just going to save this here, uh, and I'll stop here, so you guys can play around with this. So basically at this point, you should try continuing to play around with the different synths that are available. So you can make different types of sounds, and play around with the parameters. But then you can also change these notes. So you can make different types of scales, and so you can have kind of different um, sounds that you're playing. Um, and then what we're going to do next is add in a sampler. Let's go back to the schedule. Uh, well, okay, let's just add it real quick because I think this will give you guys a lot more to work with. So let's just add in our sampler real quick. So a sampler is like a synth, but instead of synthesizing a sound from scratch, it actually takes samples. So this is like a piano sample. And the thing that's actually really cool about Tone is you can take any sample and it'll pitch it for you. So you only need one sample. It's better if you have multiple ones, but you only need one sample to create a sampler, and it'll create all the other pitches for you. So we do need to get a sample. We can probably steal the sample that this piano is using. Let's see. Let's go to network and look for MP3. Okay, so you can see these are all of the samples that are being used by this piano sampler. So let's grab A4. That'll be the best one to use. Uh, let's see. So you can see the link here. I'm going to copy this and paste it over here. So there's our piano sample. And you can really do this with anything. You can do it with drums. You can do it with just random sounds that you record or anything that you want to use. So I'm just going to download this A3 sample and I'm going to put it in my project. Let's go back to the sampler page and go to the API so we can see how to set this up. So basically, you just create the sampler. You have the URLs for the samples you want to use mapped to the notes that they correspond to. Um, and the base URL is where your project is. And then there's an onload function for when it's done loading. So let's throw this into our project real quick so you guys can use this. Um, so I'm going to make another variable called sampler, and we'll put our sampler in here. So we'll say sampler equals new tone.sampler. And we're also going to have to connect this
Hold on,
to,
Professor.
yeah,
You made the params an object, right?
yes.
So why is it a let not a constant like the nodes?
Um, it could be a constant. I don't know why I used let, probably just because synth was a let, but that's actually a good point. It should be a constant because it's probably not gonna change, at least not in this example. So yeah, that could be a constant. Okay, so we have our sampler here. So let's upload our piano note real quick. We're gonna add a file. Oops. Okay, we're gonna upload a file. So we have our A4. So there it is there. And we're gonna copy a link to this file. And let's actually put it in a folder. We'll call this folder samples. And let's put the A4 in there. And so it has this link that we're gonna have to use to load it. So then if we go back to script.js, so I'm going to put this object up here as well. So I'm going to say constant sampler um, uh, params. And so for our A4 note, we have this sample. So I copied the link there And so I just pasted it right in here. Um, and for our base URL, I'm hoping I don't have to put a base URL if I use the whole thing, although I might want to change this later. So yeah, let's just, oh, sorry. Let's put the base URL as everything up to A4. So we can add more notes if we want to later. So that's just the path to where that note is. And then we need an on load. Um, so we'll know when the sampler is done. So we can do another comma and say on load. And this will just be a function. And we could actually call, so we're waiting for a couple different things here. Um, we'll just have a sampler loaded Boolean just to prevent the sampler from running before it's loaded. So we'll say sampler loaded equals false. And so when the samples load, we'll say sampler loaded equals true. And so then we'll put this sampler params into our sampler. And for now, I'm just gonna trigger the same note from our sampler. So it'll play a piano along with our synth. So we'll say sampler dot trigger attack release, and we'll trigger the same note. We'll just play a quarter note. Okay, I think that's everything that we need to do. Uh-oh, we're getting an error. Okay, let's go over here and take a look at the error we're getting. No available buffers for note 60. Okay, so it should fill out the other notes. Um, let's take a look at our sampler code. So A1, A2, base URL. Um, um, maybe, I don't know why this would make a difference, but we could put this in quotations. Oh, base URL has to have a capital U. I thought that looked weird. Onload is a lowercase l though. It's always um, different. Let's try it again. No available buffers. This just means it hasn't loaded a file for this note. Okay, so let's look at this again. Maybe I missed something. Oh, I forgot to put this in here, URLs. So I can't just put the thing in here. I have to call this URLs and then put the notes because I might have multiple URLs. I just forgot this part. So let's try that now. We still have an error. Um, oops. Okay, let's reload and see if it's the same error. Oh, I forgot to do okay. So this is a little hacky. I'll figure out a better way to do this later, but if we don't know if our sampler is loaded, we can't play our sampler yet. So I'm gonna say if not sampler loaded, then I'm just going to return. This is basically just a quick way of just like leaving a function if the sampler is not ready yet. So this way it won't try to play our sample before our samples are loaded. And let's console.log when our samplers are loaded. So I'll say console.log samples loaded. Okay, so they're not loading now. That's the issue. Let's see if I missed anything. Okay, sampler is, oops, new tone.sampler. That's all good. Sampler params to destination. That all looks right. We have our URLs. maybe now I don't want this to be a string, although I still don't think it matters. URLs, base URL, onload. Um, huh. Um, let's see. Okay, I'm just gonna try copying this whole thing directly in and then modifying it. Okay, let's see, copy. Okay, here's my setup function. I'll just get rid of the constant because we've already declared it. And let's format this. And so we don't have A1 or A2, we have A4. That's A4.mp3. And our base URL is this. And here's our onload function. Let's just console.log samples loaded. Samples sample loaded equals true. I don't know why this is not working. I think everything looks right. Let's try just putting in this whole URL here, and the base URL will just be empty string. Maybe that will fix it. Okay, I'm not really sure why that's not working. I'm gonna have to spend more time debugging it, but I'll get it to work soon. And oh, here we go. I'm getting a cross-origin error, but it's on the same page. Oh no, this is a different shoot. Okay. I thought it would serve it from the same server, but it's not doing that. Okay, so yeah, actually this is a trickier error than I expected. So I'll figure this out and update the code so you guys can use that later. But anyway, I'm going to stop recording here and see if you guys have questions.